Okay, welcome back from your long-awaited break. We're just going to move into the final session today, and I'm really delighted, first of all, to introduce Mark Fitzpatrick, who's Director of Implementation at the Aotearoa Circle. Again, I guess I've sort of how I've met most of these, most of the speakers from New Zealand is through various bits of work we've been doing, and at the moment we're doing a project for ASB looking at future land use in New Zealand, and I had the pleasure of interviewing Mark quite recently about that, and it was at that time I realized there was some really interesting work going on at the Circle, and I thought that would be fit really well with what we're looking at today, and really just highlighting, you know, things, thinking about things differently in New Zealand is what we're trying to look at here, and I think the Circle's work really highlights that. So Mark, I guess, is basically spends most of life working in sustainability, biodiversity, and environmental work, and specializing in the nature sector. And I guess this is such a key issue when we're thinking about different ways of valuing our food systems, and valuing nature as part of that is really key. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Mark today. And without further ado, I'll just pass it over.
Thanks, Alan. Tēnā koutou katoa. So look, thank you very much for having me here today, guys. I'm really, I guess, I feel privileged to be able to have these conversations with anyone and everyone who recognises the challenge that we face as a country and as a globe in multiple different levels. I wasn't able to be here this morning because I had a workshop with our Rangatahi Advisory Panel, which is one of our initiatives, and that's a group of under 30-year-olds. They're members of they work for our leading partners, and they act as a shadow board to our leading partners, and every month they front up to those organisations and provide governance level feedback to them from a under 30-year-old perspective on the initiatives that they put on the table. And it's always fascinating sitting around the table with younger generations who are going to be the recipients of the decisions that we make to inform the decisions that we're making today. So I couldn't pass up the opportunity to be with them when they sat down with the Department of Conservation this morning to talk to them about their engagement and how it is that they're going about engaging with New Zealanders. So I apologise I wasn't here this morning, but I hope you understand why I couldn't be. So look, today I'll talk to you a bit about the Circle, who we are, how we came about, some of the work we've done, and then in particular drilling in on a project that we've had going now for several months, and a project which I think really is surfacing some insights in a part of New Zealand that will undoubtedly prompt land use change. And I think if I had to say something as a preface to all of this, it's that the system is broken. And what we recognise in the work that we've completed in the Bay of Plenty region is demonstrating that we built a system founded on pursuit of profits, and we're heading down a pathway where those profits are going to disappear off a cliff. And they're going to disappear because of climate change and because of the erosion of natural capital. And because climate change is exacerbating the erosion of natural capital, because we have dissolved the resilience within nature to absorb those changes that are coming our way. So we were founded back in 2019 as a non-profit. We're a registered charity. And Sir Rob Fenwick, Sir Jonathan Porritt, and then Secretary of Environment Vicky Robertson got together and recognised that there is currently no non-profit entity that brings the government and the private sector around the table to tackle the challenges that we all face. So I kicked it off in 2019 and said, we're not going to be here in 2035. Because by 2035, the problem's either solved or we're stuck. So there's an immense sense of urgency within the organisation. We bring leaders from those organisations around the table to collaborate on work streams that are of concern to all. And not just those that are sitting around the table, but considered concern to all of New Zealand. It is public-private, and most importantly, we're non-advocacy. We have 3 public sector CEOs that sit on our board. We call them the guardians. We don't submit on policy. We don't advocate for any one direction or another, but we do engage directly with ministers, with the Prime Minister, talking about the work that we're doing. Because the bigger businesses in the country are around the table alongside of us, and the public sector are around the table as well. So our work includes legal opinions. We have upskilled big business on nature-related disclosures. We run climate scenarios for sectors, adaptation roadmaps, and we increasingly move into the world of implementation as well. And so I'll take you through a few of these projects today, and then again we'll summarise at the end on a project that's really relevant. Those are our partners. It's actually not up to date because we've had more partners add in the recent, well, just this week. Our leading partners there on the left, they invest more in the organisation than the others. And again, it's a partnership, not a membership. So all of these organisations put money into the kitty, or put in-kind effort into the kitty, or both, and bring their capability around the table to work on the projects that we have. Those are our guardians. Like I said, with James Palmer, Kenny Nelson and Carolyn Tremaine, all there on the board, alongside of some heavyweights in the private sector as well. And Izzy Fenwick, who is the daughter of the late Sir Rob Fenwick, is also a guardian, and she is also the guardian of the Rangatahi Advisory Panel, which was her brainchild, which has been really, really impactful, including when they sat down with the Minister for Climate Change recently in his office and gave him feedback on his emissions reduction plan that he's proposing. So I thought about how it is that we frame our work. How am I able to sort of encapsulate what it is that we do? Because we've done a lot of work streams. Last year we completed 9, or this year we've completed 9. So on average, running at about 8 to 10 a year. And I could just describe them all, but really when I looked at it, we break them down into 4 categories. We've done work by sector. We've done work at a systems level. We've done work by issue, and now we're doing work by region. And so I'll break down the projects based on those categories. It's too much here for you to read, but it shows the whakapapa. It is the whakapapa. It's the journey of our work. And I guess the only thing to point out is that we started at the top of 2020 with domains, and we've ended up at the bottom with integration. And that integration is the journey, I think, of our understanding of how it is that we need to respond to the nature-related challenges that we have, the polycrises of climate and nature. We need to integrate, and that's really hard for us, not just as humans, but when we're locked into a system that thinks in silos, thinks as an individual entity, thinks as a business, an individual landowner, rather than a single piece in a bigger system upon which we depend. And like any system, you pull on one lever and you push on another. If we've got farmers in the room, you guys know this only too well. That's the reality of the world we live in. And so that's where we're seeking to take our work streams, is into that world of integration, exploring things at an integrated level. It's hard, but it has to be done. So some of the work we've done by sector, we did the first ever climate scenario. So you may not be aware, but in New Zealand there are entities that by law are required to complete climate-related disclosures. So that is effectively them saying to their investors, we have climate risk, we have climate dependency, and this is what it looks like. In order to do that, the XRB, the External Reporting Board, requires for their sector to complete a climate scenario. And that brings a level of consistency to the organisations within the sector as to how it is they go about undertaking their climate-related disclosures. We were the first organisation that kicked that off. It was the brainchild from the Aotearoa Circle to do a sector-wide scenario, and it was with the seafood sector that we did that back in 2020. Since then, we've done it for the tourism sector, the agricultural sector, and most recently, energy and transport sector. And those were done earlier this year. One, the energy sector looked after by TWC, transport by KPMG, and we collaborated on it, so they were working together, recognising the interdependence between them. Putting a pin in the thought that while it's fantastic to have these sector-level scenarios, if they're inconsistent with one another, it's not necessarily that helpful. Integration. It's what we need. So by sector, the agri-adaptation roadmap. So this brought together the agricultural sector, key players in the agricultural sector, and said, well, right, here's our scenarios. What are we going to do about it? And just talking to the point that we have differences in those sector scenarios, we now have scenarios out there where, and this is not a criticism, this is just a reality of our entrenched way of thinking and operating. The agricultural sector identified that change is happening. We're going to have to find a new way to thrive in our regional and remote communities, because what we have right now is not going to work anymore. So we've got to adjust, and we will find a way to do that. The transport sector scenarios, which has all of the roading companies and the councils and all of those that pay for the transport system, said regional and remote communities are going to become increasingly isolated because they're going to move out of those regions, they're going to move into the cities, and they're not going to need the support they're going to need anymore because the current system isn't viable. So you have the transport sector going in one direction, and you have the agricultural sector going in another direction. And that wasn't found until we did the sector level scenarios. We went, shit, this isn't going to work. So who responds to who? And this is where you need integration. Seafood adaptation strategy. This has been going on for 4 years. So the major players in the seafood sector sit around a table together. And when I say the seafood sector, yes, Sanford, Sealord, Moana, they're all sitting around the table. New Zealand King Salmon, they're sitting around the table. But we also have World Wildlife Fund, we have Rabobank, we have NIWA, we have Hawthorne. And they're all sitting around the table together with two levels. There's a leadership group and an implementation group tackling adaptation, recognising that there is work that has to be done if the seafood sector is going to survive in light of the challenges we face, and that we better do it together. And not only do we need to do the work from adapting and coming out the other side, we actually need to develop insights. We need to know what is actually going to occur. So that work has been going on for some time. We are into the implementation phase. We have completed adaptation pathways for the deep water, the inshore, and the agricultural sectors, subsectors. We've piloted the findings of those. We've developed toolkits to support them, so a suite of actions for all of the actors that sit within the seafood sector that they're able to undertake if they want, for example, sustainable feed supply for salmon farms. And we're making those available for you. So right now we are shaping up our last 3 milestones in that project, and that's now evolving into, you guessed it, a space of integration. I'm going to talk about another project in a set, Manakai, of which Angela Clifford is a key individual and influencer in that. But what came out of Manakai and what came out of the adaptation roadmap was a discussion of modern genetic technologies. I think, judging by the average age in the room, we all remember what it was like when GM was first on the table in New Zealand, and it was almost like a nuclear moment. So there were a lot of concerns about raising this as a conversation, but one of our values as an organisation is courage, and so we decided to step head first into that. It was before the government of today announced that they will be changing the regulation. So what our Rangatahi advisory panel said came up in a meeting, and they said, hold on a second, both of these reports have said that there's potential modern genetic technologies that can help us with these crises. The answer was yes. And we're not doing anything about that? No. You need to do something about that. And so the Rangatahi was saying, can we please find an opportunity here to go down a pathway of modern genetic technologies? This is contentious. This is very contentious. But we stepped into it and we said, okay, we released a report on what could happen in that space. And subsequently, we ran a series of workshops with key players in the system, in the food system, as to what should be undertaken before, during, and after regulatory reform. Both of those reports landed on Minister Collins' desk. Both of them landed with the MD team that were running the policy process. They have the insights, they have the information now, and they can make the decisions that they want to make. Our job is to make sure that they have that information and that it comes from a credible entity, in this case PwC plus the Circle, and it comes from a convening power of people around the table that matter. And it included the organic sector. It included turners and growers who were sitting there representing the organic sector within the workshop, saying we've got to make sure that our existing land uses and our existing organic sector isn't compromised if we go down this pathway. So if we go down this pathway, how do we do it in a way that enables everything that we need as a country? So Manakai, so this explored, I'm going to murder this, Andrew. I apologise if I do. This explored the food system as a whole. So this was a step into what does New Zealand's food system need to look like. And the overarching thing that comes out the other side of this, for me, from conversations with Andrew and others, is we need a food strategy, right? Yeah. And we need a food strategy that is well-formed, with appropriate consideration of the challenges that we face. We're all, I'm sure, of the opinion that we shouldn't have starving people in this country when we're feeding so many. And I know that we say that all the time, but for crying out loud, we shouldn't. Not only that, but our food system is driving perverse outcomes. And we'll show shortly with one of our projects that that is the case even from a profitability perspective. Chapman Tripp are one of our partners. Every year they do a big piece of work. So for those from overseas, Chapman Tripp are one of our leading legal firms. They have probably the leading environmental legal practice in the country, and they do a piece of work for us every year. And I should say from a circle perspective, this is the in-kind stuff. This is where they front up and say, we'll put 200 grand of our own time on the table and we'll do a piece of work for the circle. That's the model. That's how we operate. I've done a number of pieces of work. Most recently was on the end here, protecting New Zealand's competitive advantage. And that found that 80% of our exports coming out of this country are going to markets that have some form of climate-related or nature-related requirement. A carbon border, a border carbon adjustment or whatever it is. Basically, things will be more expensive going into a country, there'll be more tariffs going into a country if we're not sustainable. It was the first time that that number got released. Prior to that, we had our director duties to manage nature that said, yes, directors, you are required to manage nature. You do have a legal responsibility to consider it. Prior to that, there were legal duties on climate change. Prior to that, managing risk, and prior to that, Sustainable Finance Forum, which saw the establishment of the Centre of Sustainable Finance New Zealand, which is now a separate entity that does a bunch of work in that space. Really pleased that this year, or next year, they are going to be kicking off their 2025 work stream, which will look at, in detail, all of the regulatory and policy barriers that prevent investments in nature. So why is it that we're unable to currently invest in nature with these, and what are the regulatory barriers that prevent that? So they will dive into everything. It'll get captured up in a single report. We'll release that to the public as we do with the other stuff. What we're really here to talk about, though, is integration, like I said at the start, and this is where our seafood sector work has gotten us to. So we're just kicking off. 4th of December is our kickoff workshop, where we are looking at sector scenarios for climate, nature, and Te Ao Māori combined. So that will consider, for the seafood sector, what are the plausible futures for the next 50 to 100 years as climate change unfolds from a climate perspective, a nature perspective, and a te tiriti perspective. And there'll be 3 scenarios that will sit in there. And one of them will be what we typically call the hothouse scenario. And that's where we have mass policy failure. And so in that scenario, they will provide a narrative for a plausible future as to what life could be like for us in 2080 and beyond if the te tiriti and our climate change policies globally get ignored. What will that mean for the seafood sector? And not just from a climate perspective, from a nature perspective as well. So sitting around the table for that, KPMG has funded a massive amount of that work because it's a world first. And they're recognising that this will not only provide to the world a model as to how we can integrate climate and nature, but also how we can bring mātauranga, how we can bring traditional indigenous knowledge into the mix of it as well. And this has been done by Sandford, Sealord, Moana Fisheries, and New Zealand King Salmon. Big entities, big business, with KPMG at the helm. The reason I say that is because there is a perception that big business doesn't give a shit. It's just not true. There is an acute awareness by big business across the globe that they're on the precipice of something that is far beyond any level of commercial disruption they've faced thus far. It's a level of disruption that could end them. And so they're taking it seriously, and they are needing to get the insights such as these in order to be able to make the right decisions. But this is the project that I really wanted to bring your awareness to. So off the back of the sector scenarios, there were conversations around the table around the discrepancies, the differences between the different sectors' perspectives of how things were going to unfold. And so the discussion was, well, how do we get some sort of coherence to this? And then it was like, well, and what about nature? You know, we're going to have climate unfold, but really, in truth, climate is going to impact nature and nature will impact us. It's not climate to us, it's climate to us via nature. And so what's that middle piece look like? And that's all the birth of this concept, natural capital regional resilience. We call it NCR squared, where we have worked with PwC and the economics modelling team to model what the flow of climate change could be through the nature realms within the region, upon which our primary sector depends, and what the financial consequence to the primary sector will be as a result. So we have, and I'll show you in a sec, we have graphs for each of the key activities within the region showing that by 2050 you'll be losing this many hundreds of millions per year. And by 2089 you'll be losing this many billions per year if you do nothing. And it's done by PwC, so it's going to get heard. In fact, it has been heard to the point where we've had to delay the release of the report while we work with some of our partners as to how they're going to deal with the consequences of this report. And it's just one region, it's just a bay. So it's really significant. We'll have the report out next year. So in summary, what is the region in the scope? It was the Bay of Plenty. What is the regional fabric? They built a system of the region. How could climate and nature variables impact the viability of key regional activities? When could they become unviable under the current system? What can they do to mitigate or adapt? And is the methodology replicable and scalable? I.e., can we repeat this in other regions? Could we have this for the whole of New Zealand? Could we have these insights for all of New Zealand? So that was the map of the bay. That's the system map of the bay. So the guys worked with a systems expert at NIWA. This is, again, the convening power of the Aotearoa Circle. NIWA is a partner, so we reached out to NIWA, brought them around the table, and they mapped the system for the region. I'm hoping I've got a slide of the people that are involved. If not, I'll tell you. But around the outside, we have the nature realms. A way of defining nature, a way of splitting nature into buckets. So we need to simplify it somehow. And in the middle, we have the key activities. In particular, they modelled financial. They've only captured 6% of GDP for the region, but they've focused in on the primary sector there. So forestry, dairy, port, meat, grain, wool and eggs, and fishing and agriculture. Now, they have the financial outcomes split in two ways. It's both by natural realm and by activity. And what it is prompting is discussion and thought around, well, if that's going to happen to fishing and agriculture, what is it going to mean for wholesale trade? Therefore, what does it mean for transport? And our transport is being impacted by atmosphere and land as well. So what's coming back the other way? And so when they're talking about things like, do we reinforce those flood defences? Do we spend $150 million on reinforcing those? The question will become, well, is the adjacent land use tenable? Well, it is if we put irrigation in. Yeah, but the stream here, or the river here, upon that irrigation stream is dependent, is also under impact. So they can start thinking at a system level and responding at a system level. So these are the individuals that we managed to bring in around the table. So Fiona McTavish is the CE of Bay of Plenty Regional Council. Simon Limmer was the CE of Silverford Farms, now in Devon Group. And Pāropata, who is an eminent mātauranga expert. The three of them live in the Bay. And then we reached out via them to other leaders in the Bay that represented the key sectors. So University of Waikato, I don't need to read them out, but you'll see, I'm sure you see names there that you recognise, you may not, but they are people in the Bay that can make decisions. There's a reason we pick people like that. It's because the end point of this project is the start point for them. And so we want for the people who are involved in this piece of work to be able to carry it forward. We want this organisation, this group, this cohort to carry this work and actually respond. And those discussions are already now unfolding. They're going, crikey, if that land use isn't viable by that date, what are we going to do? What are we going to change it to? And if it can be done within the context, and if it can be managed in the right way, if it can be done within the context of the information that these guys have shared this morning, if it can be done within the context of that system, perhaps they can change. Perhaps the bay can change into the model that we know we need to be, because the current model is broken and we know that. That's what one of the graphs looks like. That's just one of the nature realms. It's not the whole picture. And when they see that, and it's by PwC, there is a real oh shit moment. And this is the disturbance, this is the break we need to get our leaders to realise. Once they have the information, our leaders can realise that change is required. And it's not that far away. 2050, draw a line up, certainly. And to be honest with you, the three climate scenarios there, the red one is reality. The way the world is tracking. We can mitigate all we like. We can be climate neutral farms in New Zealand, and that's still going to happen, as much as we like to think it won't. So that's the red line is probably the truth. I won't say it is, but because it's a forecast, but it's the truth. And as a result, there's some serious financial consequences on the horizon that they need to respond to. So like I said, we've collated findings in two ways. By nature realm, and that's the way that nature has been segmented. Not perfect, but a way of doing it. And by activity. Now, the financial element was only applied to the activities where the data was available. So it's published research. It's been tested with the sectors themselves. There are 48 different organisations that fed into it and provided the publications through to PwC. So they were able to, for example, identify that with this many fewer frost days, there'll be this much less budding in kiwi fruit and therefore this much less growth of kiwi fruit, for example. Only if the numbers exist did they model it financially. Everything else is a qualitative. Further, it doesn't include any acute events, which is the big one, really. So it's only chronic climate change. An acute event like Cyclone Gabrielle on steroids hitting the bay just at the right angle at the right time could absolutely devastate some of those sectors. But no one is prepared to model that, which surprised me, but there's these people called actuaries who work in the space of insurance, and they're like, we don't go there. So that world is there sitting, and it's like a heavy cloud sitting over the top of it all. Everyone's aware of it, but we can't put a pinpoint and kind of go, that's what is going to happen as a result. So the big questions that we face now with this project, and for New Zealand, and for all the partners that sit in the circle, because the members are part of the circle, they are us. What are the adaptation actions that are required in the Bay? And so we have a meeting on the 24th of January. We're face-to-face in the Bay with those champions and the co-chairs to work through these findings and talk about what next. Now we have all of the big banks sitting around the table within the circle too, so ANZ, BNZ, ASB, Westpac, Rabobank, they all sit around the table as well, and they're all aware of this also. And so we'll convene them because they've got skin in the game, and we'll convene the regional leaders and we'll say, right, what are we going to do in the Bay Plenty? How are we going to respond to the fact that our current system is broken and we're going to start losing money in the near future? What is our land use change going to be? What is our future for the Bay? So that'll happen, and that'll be phase 2 of the project next year. But the other question is, what if we had one of these for every region? What if we did that in Canterbury? What would it show? What if we did it in Otago, in Southland, West Coast? And if we had that everywhere, to quote one of the heads of ANZ, we'd have a heat map for the country. We'd really be able to get visibility on where the big issues are likely to crop up. And for them to be able to redeploy capital, to invest capital into a region, to spur change, and then pull it out and redeploy it into another region, they would know where to go first and how to deploy that capital around the country. I guess the challenge for us is, in light of the fact that this information is coming to leaders in the finance sector, coming to the big players in the agricultural sector or the horde sector, the leaders of our country and government, how is it that you can grasp hold of the opportunity to create a real change? Not just growing something else within the same construction system that we have right now, but actually changing the system so that we have something different in the future, so that our Rangatahi Advisory Panel and those that are in their age, and of course those that are yet to actually join us on Earth, have a world that is manageable and better than what we've had today. And the opportunity is there. We've just got to grasp it. All right, a bit about us going forward. So our strategy going forward, we've just redone it. We've got 3 focuses. We need to change leadership mindset. So we're going to be doing more of that sort of work in the natural capital regional resilience, the stuff that spurs the directors and the organisational leaders across the country, the politicians, to change and recognising the system's broken and we need to change. So we'll keep doing that. Removing roadblocks. So work like Chapman Tripp are doing, identifying what the roadblocks are. What are they? And then how do we go about removing them? And again, convening power with the right people around the table to identify what we need to do there. They're finally selling the vision. For a lot of people, things are a bit shit right now. It's really hard on so many levels. It's difficult for us to see past the issues we've got right in front of our face. Well, what's the vision? What can New Zealand look like in 2035, 2040 if we actually invest in our natural capital the way we need to? If we can build resilience to climate change and we can reform the system, that needs to be defined. And that story needs to be told to New Zealanders so we have something to hold on to and we can steer toward a better future. So our work program looks like that next year. So continuing, finalising our seafood adaptation strategy. Future fit shipping. All of our leading partners are saying we can't decarbonise our supply chain because of ships. Ravensdown down the road here, they're like, shipping is it's the biggest part of our footprint. So we've got Deloitte on that now. They're working to identify alternative fuel roadmaps for New Zealand. Everything from bunkering facilities, supply, what ports would need to do, health and safety issues, etc., for 4 alternative fuels for shipping. And we're working collaboratively with Australia to work out what it would require for us to set up a green shipping corridor with Australia. And going back to the protecting competitive advantage, if we do this, then that enables us to be more profitable with our exports as we continue to export. We'll always be an export nation. Natural capital regional resilience, we finish that off, then we go into phase 2, talk about integrated scenarios. Growing Natural Capital Conference, I understand that this is a piece of work which will be set up next year with the Institute of Directors in Chapter 0. It'll be a one-day conference with multiple directors to capture their hearts and minds. You capture one director, you capture 3 businesses. And so they're a target audience for us. Nature Finance Forum is being set up. The first piece of work on that one is the work that Chapman Tripp are doing. We're looking at COP and how we can get involved in that. And then three projects at the bottom that are all potential. I had conversations this morning with Sarah Sala about data and voluntary carbon markets. Whether or not there's something worth exploring now, don't know. But we're going to be looking into that. There's a question, everyone always harps on about data. We don't have enough data, we don't have the right data, it's not stored in one place, so what do we need to do in that space? Biodiversity credit markets and voluntary carbon markets. Don't know if you're aware, but there is currently no pathway for New Zealand businesses to invest in carbon credits that are based in New Zealand that will provide them with indigenous biodiversity benefit as well. So they're going offshore. So instead of spending money on carbon credits here, they're spending $7 carbon credit over in India. So there is a need, I understand, and I'm not an expert, we're just digging into this, need for a voluntary carbon market, perhaps, but perhaps it wouldn't be the right thing, in order for them to be able to start investing their money into New Zealand. I think in Australia they've got to invest 50% of their offsets into Australia, but here you don't. So there's some work to be done there. And then finally that vision piece that I spoke about before. That's it. That's it. So thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have or talk to you about that.